Hello participants, my name is Michael Kodagi and I'll be taking you through this module 3-3 titled Teaching Methodology and Delivery of Science Lessons. Alright, we'll go through the objectives. Our objectives for this module is that by the end of this module, every participant should be able to identify the main conductors of steps in a science lesson. They would also identify the ways of students' participation described in the teacher manual. Our second objective is that participants will explain the use of teaching materials in a science lesson, including the safety tips of a science lesson. Second point for number 2 is ways teachers or participants, you will be able to explain ways of a blackboard management in a science lesson. Alright participants, before we begin, I'd like to leave you some few questions. Let's look at how to make a delicious coffee. You can discuss with your friends. So we have the questions. What materials do you need to make a delicious cup of coffee? Next question. What steps are needed to make a cup of coffee? And who does each of those steps? Welcome back participants. Alright, to make a delicious cup of coffee you need materials, then you also need to follow the steps of making the coffee. And there are also people involved in making coffee. Either can be you or sometimes your mother or somebody who boils the water for you. So for example, if you're making coffee with coffee beans, you would need several materials such as cup, coffee beans, sugar, milk, boiling water, a coffee maker, a filter, and you may need equipments like roasting beans, grinder to grind the beans into powder, or some of you just need to use the 3-in-1 instant coffee. So to have that, you will also need to follow the steps, the process of making a delicious cup of coffee. For example, to have a cup of coffee using the roasted beans, you first need to roast them, then you grind them, put them into an espresso machine if you have one. You will need also boiled water, which is poured into a cup, and you need to add milk, sugar after you have poured in your cup of powdered coffee, and stir them well. Then you have your delicious cup of coffee. For others who are using 3-in-1, you simply add water after your mother or someone who has already boiled the hot water. So you see there are people involved in the steps of making a coffee. So after boiling water, after taking the boiling water, you pour it into a cup and add in your instant coffee, the 3-in-1, and you stir until you dissolve the ingredients and you have a delicious cup of coffee. So likewise, for a good science lesson, you also need materials, and we also need to follow certain steps to achieve the objective of the science lesson. Alright, the first thing that we need to look for in a science lesson are the main conductors in the lesson. So who are the main conductors in a science lesson. So I'd like you to have a look at the 4 parts of the lesson in a lesson flow. What do you notice about the main conductors of the lesson? Give your reasons of what you have noticed as a group or in pairs. Alright, participants, what do you notice about the main conductors? You will notice that the teacher is the main conductor in the beginning of the lesson and at the end of the lesson. The role of the teacher is to assist students and facilitate students' activities to achieve these lessons. The role of the teacher is to get the students to be interested and motivated to learn the lesson contents, get the students to think about the key question, facilitate the students to follow these steps or the steps in the lesson, and guide them to require scientific concepts in the summary. It means that teachers facilitate and help students to participate in the main process of the lesson. So the main conductors of the lesson are the students. Teachers also need to utilize the blackboard to facilitate the steps of the lesson successfully. Students' participation in the lesson. Students are the main conductors in the activity of the lesson. This is because the lesson should be child-centered, therefore students are the main conductors of the following lesson steps: the prediction, experiment or observation, the result of the lesson, reasoning, and finding new answers. Through the participation in the above steps, students can find the concept by themselves and deeply understand it. They can also foster the ownership for learning. There are several ways to enhance students' participation, such as working in pairs, group work, or group discussion, or class discussion, and many others that you can think of. Alright, participants. For example, in this lesson on sprouting, you have a copy of the student's textbook there. In this lesson in sprouting, in step 2, the key question, students participate to think about answer to the key question. And the next step, in step 4, students participate to observe growth by measuring changes of height and size. Steps 5 and 6, where students participate, is where they observe and record the results in their notebooks. They also conduct steps 6 and 7 with their peers or in groups by sharing their ideas and new findings and reasons of the lesson itself. Let's look at another example, which is on property of air 1. In this lesson, students also conduct activities by themselves in their groups or in pairs. Students also predict the answer to the key question. And in step 4, students conduct the experiments themselves with the help of teachers facilitating the exercise. Students also participate in step 5 to find the result and present it to their teacher and the class. In step 6, students participate to think about reasons about the results and share it with their peers. In step 7, students participate in a discussion about the application of the concept to other examples in daily lives. And in step 8, students summarize the new concept discovered by themselves at the summary of the lesson. All right, participants, here is an exercise for you to do. Discuss the tips to enhance students' participation. Example, giving tasks as recorders, reporters, or leaders in a group to all the groups. Right, welcome back, participants. I hope you have given some tips on how to enhance student participation. Let's have a look at some of the tips where we can help student participation. First tip, teachers should not give answers of the key question from the beginning. Our next tip, competition or pricing can give positive reinforcement to participate in the activity. Third tip, sharing ideas to other members in class and another class of the same grade motivates students to seek their own answers. Seek their ideas. A fourth tip is the necessary teaching materials should be prepared for each of them. And fifth tip, praising the group that cooperate and work together. Now let's have a look at the kind of teaching materials that we should need, or how to use teaching materials if you have this apparatus or teaching materials with you in your school. How would you use them? Here are some teaching materials which I have here with me. A balance. If you had this teaching material, how would you use them? A balance with some weights, if you have weights. So we have used small stones, a measuring cylinder. If you have a measuring cylinder at school, how would you use this measuring cylinder? How would you facilitate the steps and how to use them, the safety of using such materials in your lesson? We also have materials such as beaker. How would you facilitate using a beaker or reading the measurement on a beaker? Likewise, if you have a thermometer, how would you facilitate using a thermometer? Or a dry cell, some wires, and a bulb. How would you facilitate using these materials? So, Alright, your activity, you have to form 5 groups, get into groups, study the teaching materials that are given or the teaching apparatus that is given to you. Find out the lesson in the teacher manual about the materials that are given and how they are going to be used in the lesson. Or make a presentation of the material and the apparatus that are used in the specific lesson. Example, how is a mesh going to be measured using a measuring cylinder and the safety precautions required in that lesson. Welcome back, participants. Alright, teaching materials. In implementing the science lesson, teachers must be certain of how to use the materials, as I've shown previously. How to handle them, for example, during experiments or activities. And teachers must know the safety guidelines of using or how to handle these science materials and apparatus. Teachers must also be certain that the students are guided well on how to use this and must understand the safety rules or safety guidelines. Safety must be given the highest priority in implementing, which is also stated in the junior primary syllabus. Correct and safety techniques, as well as the selection of experiments, resources, material, or field experiments appropriate to age levels must be carefully considered regarding the safety precautions for every instructional activity. So it is paramount for us teachers to be aware of our safety guidelines, conducting activities indoor and outdoor, and the kind of apparatus that we use. Safety. While no comprehensive list exists to cover all situations, the teacher's manual also contains the safety instructions in some lessons. However, the following should be reviewed to avoid potential safety problems. Appropriate safety procedures should be used in the following situations: observing wildlife, handling living and preserved organisms, and coming in contact with natural hazards such as poison ivy, ticks, mushrooms, insects, spiders, poisonous plants, and snakes. Secondly, engaging in field activities in or near or over bodies of water. Thirdly, handling glass tubings and other glassware, sharp objects, and labware. Handling natural gas burners or Bunsen burners and other sources of flame or heat. Safety must also be considered when working in or with direct sunlight, and handling chemicals and other hazardous substances. Alright, major teaching materials to be used. While there are no spaces and time to explain all the teaching materials in the teacher's guide, the following major teaching materials are explained in this module. The teacher's guide also explains the points to use the teaching material. Teachers should read the teacher manuals carefully and try out the use of teaching materials in advance. Alright, now we have a look at our Blackboard plan. When teaching, how do we use the Blackboard? Our Blackboard management. Right, here is an example of the Blackboard plan or management of Blackboard. What do you do when using the whole Blackboard plan? What do we do before the lesson? What do we do during the lesson? And thirdly, what do we do after the lesson? Participants, what do we do before the lesson? 1. Ensure that the board is cleared after all students take note of the previous lesson. 2. Read the Blackboard plan in the teacher's manual and write the date, topic of the lesson, etc. in advance. Thirdly, the text of the writing must be clear, big enough for the students to read and understand. Make sure each writing starts from the left of the blackboard to the right. Prepare the materials like charts and flashcards to supplement blackboard writing as necessary. Now, what to do during the lesson? During the lesson, we should know when to write the points. Secondly, basically blackboard writing should remain during the lesson. Write the contents of the lesson according to the sample in the teacher manual. Write instructions for the activity or draw diagram picture to supplement visual aid. Give exercises, etc. on blackboards for students to understand the lesson content. Write the students' answers or options on the board. Give space for students to write the answers also on the board. We also need to consider writing the main points on the blackboard and use it to explain further during the lesson. Thirdly, what do we do after the lesson? Write the summary or key concepts of the lesson according to the answers of the students and the key question. Secondly, review the lesson by writing questions on the board or pasting chart, posters, etc. Thirdly, students should also participate in writing the answers or drawing pictures and illustrations on the board where necessary. Let's have a look at the Blackboard plan. Here on the Blackboard plan, we have the introduction, a key question, discussion, and summary at the end. The introduction is at the top of the blackboard. The key question just below the key question is just below the topic. Then the activity, questions or steps for the students to do, our discussion question, and at the end of the blackboard we have the summary. So teachers, your final activity is look at a grade 4 lesson in the textbook, topic 7.1, lesson number 2, observing plant growth. Discuss and identify points for each part of the lesson, then write out a blackboard plan for these points. Find the necessary points of the for introduction, the key question, the activity, discussion, and summary. Thirdly, you will conduct your presentations and explain how the lesson would be presented step by step from introductory to summary. Welcome back, participants. All right, the Blackboard plan. The introduction can be skipped if necessary. Teacher, you can also use drawings or pictures to capture attention of students. The key question. The key question must be indicated at all times to make the students to refer to it during the lesson. It is also recommended for students to copy the key question, because this is the key to the lesson. And in the activity, teacher can show question or steps. When students predict or express their ideas and findings, teachers should record their ideas on the blackboard so that everyone can share their ideas and compare their ideas as well. It can help the discussion in their group or a whole class discussion. Teacher should also record or should write down the discussion according to the student's opinion. If the discussion results are far from the sample answer in teacher's manual, teacher should facilitate them to reach the right direction. And finally, in summary, teacher can conduct and write the main concept of the lesson after students find the answer of the key questions by themselves. Teachers need to guide and give feedback to write correct summary. Finally, participants, summary. To conclude this module 3-3, let's look at what we have covered in this module. There are 4 points that we covered in this module, and there are 8 steps in a science lesson. Secondly, teachers must make students to participate in the main activities of the lesson. Thirdly, teachers should master the use of teaching materials and prepare it well before the actual lesson. And our 4th point we covered is Blackboard. Blackboard preparation or management. Blackboard must be used to help students to understand the lesson contents. Some writing should be given by the students and some can be guided by the students, which means that you as teacher write or record their opinions or answers. Well, thank you, participants, for being part of this module 3-3. Thank you and goodbye.